if you look at the sort of the conventional wisdom that we've had about gun violence for basically 100 years, people on the right tend to think of gun violence as being due to like characterologically bad people
right,
who aren't afraid of whatever the criminal justice system is going to do to them. And, that leads you to think the only way that you can solve the gun violence problem is to basically disincentivize it by threatening people with ever stiffer prison sentences.
right.
People on the left historically have tended to think of gun violence as being due to economic desperation. These are people who are desperate to feed their families. And so that leads you to think that the gun violence problem, the only way to solve it is to disincentivize it by making the alternatives to crime better. More jobs, programs, more anti-poverty, whatever. And I think, what those two conventional wisdoms both share is the belief, the implicit belief usually, that gun violence is basically premeditated and deliberate. And, before anyone ever pulls a trigger, they are comparing sort of the pros and cons of what might happen.
A very
as a
intellectual
result.
approach to gun violence.
Yeah, exactly. As if people are being sort of very rational about this. And it turns out that's not what gun violence in America is. When you look closely at the data, as I have, you can see most shootings in America are not premeditated. They're not motivated by economic considerations. They're garden variety arguments that go sideways and they end in tragedy because someone's got a gun. So we've just been like misdiagnosing the problem. We've been like trying to cure cancer with heart disease drugs. No wonder we haven't made more progress. And I think we just need a very, very different diagnosis of the problem to be able to solve it.
All right. Well, you bring the story to life about why we've stalled with a story at the start of the book where you talked about two Chicago neighborhoods, Greater Grand Crossing and South Shore. Pull that apart a little bit for us, if you would.
The economic conditions are almost exactly the same in the two neighborhoods. The demographics of the neighborhoods are almost exactly the same. And so like everybody's intuition that like social conditions must matter a lot would predict that the rates of shootings would be exactly the same. Both neighborhoods are served by exactly the same criminal justice system. And so if you, thought that the real issue was how tough the criminal justice system was, that conventional wisdom would make you think that the rates of shootings should be exactly the same in both neighborhoods. And yet, in fact, like on a per capita basis, shootings are fully twice as common in Greater Grand Crossing. And so it's like our conventional wisdoms that we've been sitting on for 100 years.
Something's not lining up, right?
Have absolutely no way to explain this huge difference. Like literally right across Dorchester Avenue, shootings are twice as common. And I think that got me to think no wonder we have not made more progress solving the gun violence problem in a world in which we literally can't explain why shootings are so much more common on one side of the street than the other.
And did you get to some answers on why that is?
One of the key insights of behavioral economics is that our minds engage in sort of two types of thinking of which we're only aware of one. And so the sort of the deliberate kind of weighing of pros and cons, that's psychologists or behavioral economists call that slow thinking. So Danny Kahneman in his wonderful book,
right.
Thinking Fast and Slow, calls that system two.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is that that's very sort of mentally effortful. And, when our mental bandwidth is depleted, when we're under stress, we're not thinking deliberately. We are our minds are designed to have another type of thinking that is so low effort, it happens below the level of consciousness. It's almost automatic or involuntary. It's fast thinking, or Danny Kahneman calls it system one thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's designed to respond in ways that are usually helpful to us, but can cause trouble when they're overgeneralized, right? And it's human nature, right? We all go on tilt in difficult situations and we act emotionally, and system one is doing things that we don't necessarily realize. And I think that is, I think at a high level, what the argument of the book is that gun violence is much more of a system one problem, a system one fast thinking problem, than a system two incentive problem. And all of our policies have been focused on addressing system two and changing incentives. And I think that's why we haven't made more progress.
Right.